I
Yeah.
know, right? Well, thank you, Dulce, for being here. I'm so excited to introduce you to my audience. Now, I want to share a little bit about why I thought you were so special, and I wanted to have you on the podcast. We were on the board of the South Shore Conference for Women together, and we did that open sort of conversation where women in the Plymouth community and the South Shore community got together and talked about some of the challenges that they face. And one of the things you said was about how so many of us, like, one of the things that the challenges is about making friends, building relationships, and you talked about fear and about how so many of us are afraid. We're afraid to be accepted. We're afraid we won't be accepted. We're afraid of what other people will think. There's just a lot of fear that comes into our decision making that honestly is almost subconscious. And I was like, oh, that's such a delicious conversation to have. I wanted to have you on so we could talk about this idea. But before we dive straight in, let's introduce you to everybody and tell my audience a little bit about yourself. Where do you come from? What do you do? Why do you do what you do? Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Dulce Orozco. I am a licensed mental health counselor licensed in the state of Massachusetts. And I just say that because unfortunately it's very limiting because of licensing, where you can do and where can you do it. So I do one-on-one therapy with women of color, not just Latinas, but women of color in general, where I assist them to really find new perspectives so they're able to honor their magic, which I feel that we suppress so much, just how unique we are and how magical we are. And most recently, Mines, I also started working with groups of employees of color, and I'm really loving that. That just sparked a whole new fire in me.
Oh my goodness. You said like a few things there that I want to talk about. So, all right, I want to hear about your employee thing first. Let's dive into that because I'm so curious. What are you, so, because this is something that's I feel very passionately about. So going back into corporate America, when I was on the outside of corporate America, I would see all the DEI initiative stuff in the news and people talking about it. But like, I mean, I was doing my own thing outside, so I could be, I was inclusive in my community and my audience and so on. So corporate America didn't really impact me that much. Having gone back into corporate America now as a person of color who passes and then who has so many friends who are people of color, who are, I would love, like, we have a very different experience of corporate America, I think, than our colleagues do who are white. And so I am curious to know, what are some of the challenges what are some of the things that you're finding that are challenges that employees of color are facing in the workplace? And that you mentioned that you're finding it very fulfilling. I'm curious to know, like, what excites you about working with this group and the potential for greatness there.
Yeah, so I say that I was raised as a therapist in a very conservative way, and I was raised as a human being in also a very conservative way. But as a therapist, I meant it because it's almost like following the path. What was the path? The path was you go to school, you get your license, which for me was very difficult, just because of how the process of being an international student was, right? And then having to be sponsored by a company and all of that, like the immigration process behind the scenes. And then what you typically see, Minez, is people working in community mental health setting, which I did for many years, especially Spanish being my first language and being a bicultural therapist. I had so many, like the level of people that were referred to me was so high, right? Um, uh, and then my daughter was born, and for my family it just didn't make sense financially to give, and it's a very personal decision, but for us it didn't make sense to give someone pretty much my whole salary so I could, that person could watch
Mhm.
her and I could go work. And that's when I started my private practice. And what I always saw was people um, taking insurance. So taking insurance was the way to do it. And I decided not to take one or two, but every single insurance. Like I was part of like 12 different insurance network, right? And I was a generalist, and I had so many referrals. Again, I speak Spanish is my first language, and depending on the day, I speak Portuguese or Portuñol. It depends, right? Like sometimes it's Portuguese, sometimes it's like a mixture. But just because of that, I got so many referrals. So in my mind, being a therapist meant doing one-on-one therapy, right? And not choosing and then like very organically through COVID. Um, well, that's maybe that's another story. I'm getting ahead of myself. But I guess basically what happened is that I was able to see how fear was stopping me from doing more and trying new things. And this a local corporation reached out to me, and they were like, "We have a lot of international employees. Are you open to have a workshop?" This was December 2020, the middle of the pandemic, and none of them could travel to see their families. So they were like, "Do you want to do a workshop on how to approach the holidays?" And I was like, "Let's do it." I did it. And I realized that what they wanted was to talk. So when they came back to me and they were like, they loved it. Can we do a workshop a month? I was like, I don't think they want to hear me talking. They want to talk among themselves, right?
Mhm.
So that was my proposal, and I've been working with them ever since for the past 2 year plus. But that opened up possibilities to do workshops about um, things that we're afraid to say and we need to say, and what happens, right? What are your so going back to your challenges, the question about challenges. I feel, Minessa, that many times we see in paper or when you see a website, it's like, we are inclusive. We have all this, like ERGs and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the reality is not, when you really dig into what happens, that's not the case, unfortunately, right? It checks every mark when you look at it from the outside, but not from the inside. So having an opportunity to talk about what's going on, which for me has been surprising, really, the fact that people are speaking up, and I feel it's because they're tired. They just, they cannot sustain this lifestyle anymore.
Yeah.
Um, so the challenges that I've seen are not enough representation, and just the band-aids that are put up when something happens, right? Like that get covered up with more band-aids, like bigger band-aids, and that's just it's collapsing. So people are leaving, people are very dissatisfied, and I feel that more and more, some of them are speaking up, while some of them feel trapped, and while some of them feel this is never going to change, this is how I've always been treated, it's better than what my parents had.
Mhm.
Therefore, I do have a job while everybody else is being laid off. What should I be complaining about? And this create all this cognitive dissonance in your mind, and you feel like crap, right? Like, so that's kind of like the ongoing challenge I've seen, which is it's just worsening, unfortunately. Does that answer your
Oh
question,
my God,
Vanessa?
it's so good. As you're talking, all I could think of was it was almost like you were sharing, like, because I remember when I first came to the States. So I'm an American citizen, but I lived in Pakistan my whole life until I was 20 something. So when I came here, I essentially immigrated. However, I had the enormous privilege of already having a US passport, which meant that I didn't have to deal with all of the additional honestly trauma and exhaustion and that comes from having to prove that you are worthy and okay to be allowed into the country, right? So I didn't have to prove anything. I just was able to come in. So that's enormous amount of privilege. Even including that, even taking that into consideration, it's when you come here and now you think about how your parents grew up, because as you said that really resonated to me, because I'm thinking to myself, okay, my grandparents lived in a very small village in northern India, right? In Bhiwandi. And then they moved to Karachi, and they were, after partition, they were one of the first families to move to Karachi, to Pakistan, and left some of the family came, but some of them stayed there, right? So that's the context that for many of us that we use, right? So like, I'm not working in a mud hut, so I'm good, right? And so now you come here and you're working in, like, we have electricity, and we had electricity too, but like at some point in my ancestral past, we didn't. And so we're willing, I think the framework we bring in is that we're willing to tolerate a lot less, because where our experience shows, well, and then there's you said earlier, I should be grateful to have a job. Like that's a big one, that's a big story that is so, because it's almost like somebody's like literally beating you up and just saying you should be grateful that you have a roof over your head. Yes, I know this hurts, but you be grateful to have a roof over your head. And it's interesting because I feel like people are talking about it now. I don't think that they've talked about it in the past. And I think that now that they are talking about it, and I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on this, because this is something that like my brain gets muddy when I think about it. Cause I'm like, how do we solve this problem? So you have a bunch of people who are in a space that they're feeling unheard. They're overworked, they're overwhelmed. COVID didn't help, because you've got this, now you're working from home, and you may not have the boundaries set. And for many of us, we were raised with work ethics that have you literally working till your knuckles are bleeding. And so you will work without having that, I'm shutting the door and leaving the office. You will work until you drop dead. As somebody who works with these corporations, do you feel like the companies understand what's happening or see what's happening? Like, what do you think is happening on that level? Because it seems like they're saying the words, the people on the bottom are saying they're in trouble. The solution isn't actually helping. So what is actually happening in that spot?
Yeah, so this is relatively new for me, right? I've been doing this work for the past 2 years, which is not too long. I feel that I'm learning more as I go. Um, and I haven't had the chance to work ongoing with many corporations, right? I've worked ongoing with about 3 or so nonprofits, and also colleges. And I feel that's a whole different ball game than the representation
Finance
of
or
a corporate.
healthcare or something like that.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. Yep.
And I see the difference. So I do see the difference, to answer your question. And I don't know if what I've seen is, so I don't want to generalize, right? But from what I've seen, no, they do not understand. However, I don't know. I don't know if part of it is denial, right? Um, like there's a very naive part of me that wants to believe it's denial. But what I've seen is that, um, or like the bigger part of me, and it makes me sad to say this, but I'm gonna say it, is productivity and capitalism and numbers, right? And even in mental health, coming from a mental health background, in a nonprofit, mind you, productivity was a big part of how the whole system, the healthcare system, which I don't think, works well or well enough, um, right? It was productivity, and it was an incentive that was based on whether or not you meet that productivity. And it got to the point where we were encouraged to double book clients, Right, so it's but to answer your question, I want to believe that um they don't understand it because they don't know what's going on. But I feel that unfortunately, they do know what's going on and they don't care, or like the level of turnover or the level of dissatisfaction among employees, that's not big enough to change the culture, right?
Yeah.
However, I see these smaller companies that completely align with my values, and that are like, so not every company needs to be like that. But I see that in the like I feel that I see that in smaller companies, Minessa. I feel like these big corporations lack that, and not because they don't have good people there. I absolutely
Right.
want to say that there's beautiful, amazing people there, but sometimes they're not enough. What, like, their efforts are not enough, right? Or what they're doing, it's not enough. And it might not be as valued and as appreciated. And it gets to the point where they can even be seen as travel makers, or, like just
Mm-hmm.
somebody that is going against the flow, or which I've been all of that. I've been named all of that.
Oh, I'm all about that. I'm all about disruption. It's
Right?
like you can't have change until
Yeah.
you disrupt. But I think,
Yeah.
there's an
So,
element of not being afraid, in order to do that. Because like you said, some people can't afford to be seen as a troublemaker because they need to be able to have that job, right? So they can't speak up.
yes, but unfortunately, that only exacerbates all these
Hmm.
beliefs and all these trauma and all these cycles. So it's like, yes, I see it, right? And maybe you're a single mom, and maybe you also have been harassed by your boss, and you feel that's the thing. It's like, where um where is that line where, even though you're afraid, your well-being, your emotional well-being, your right, like that,
Right. Yeah, yeah,
it's like,
totally.
where is that line, and how much are you willing to take, right? Because there's this part of you that feels that you cannot speak up. um and it's I feel it's impossible to do it unless you have the resources, and where are those resources? Right.
Which goes back to the capitalism thing. Because again, it's like you have to acknowledge that something's a problem, and then also acknowledge that, okay, this resource is needed to solve it, and then provide that resource in order for that to happen, right? So but if you don't have someone at the higher levels in a corporation who has that perspective, then that's just not where the money or the resources are going to go. And you said something. You said, oh shoot, what was it that you said? It was so good. It was so good. Hold on, I hate it when that happens. um you were talking about people. You were talking about people who are like, you were like, what is it? Where is that line? Right? Where is that line? And I think that's such a powerful thing, right? Because like when you think about any change in your life, there there is the moment before you found the line and the moment after. Now, it may take you 6 years to leave the marriage or leave the relationship or whatever, but the moment that you discover the line, you'll never
Mm,
forget that that's the moment you
no.
decided, I'm done. And I'm
And you
going,
cannot unsee it,
I
right? you
know,
you can
right?
try, and you're like, no, 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 la, I don't want to see it, I don't want to think about it, but deep down in your heart, you know that it's there.
Absolutely. And I think, what you said earlier about the fact that more people are talking about it now. I follow Vanessa Bennett online. She's a therapist and she's fabulous. And so she did, I can't remember a video a long time ago where she was talking about how she said that we are entering into a space where people are just tired of other people telling them what to do.
Mm,
People are tired of having to, going back to what you were saying earlier, actually, you were talking about magic, helping, women of color find their magic, and that so much of it is of our magic is inside, right? I'm going to connect these two thoughts together because there's a drawing I have of myself that I put on Instagram that is me standing there. It's like a cartoon me and just like sparkles coming out of my fingers, right? Because in my mind, I see my magic like unleashing and like lighting up a cave.
Mm.
You know, it's like it's such a cute little picture. I'm like, oh, I see myself. But that's literally how I see what's happening to me now. Whereas before I see myself as having been like almost dulled and grayed out. And so I wanted to ask you, like, and it's only of late that I've started to realize how much women of color have to suppress their inner magic. Like, it's it's actually so sad. Like, it's heartbreaking, right? Because I can remember, and now so I'm curious to know, why do you feel like women of color feel like we have to hide all the things about us that are magical?
Yeah. Um, there's so many things to this question, but the first thing I think of is survival, right? It's like, it seems to me that for so long, and unfortunately for some people, even still now, you really needed to blend in. The less attention that you cause, the better. Even, right now there's at least with Spanish, and I feel that it's happening with many other languages too, but please tell me what you think. I see this almost like this shame on second, third generation because they don't speak Spanish, and it's like, but why didn't you like why did this happen, right? Like not blaming their grandparents, their parents, but almost like asking why, and it's because, well, we didn't want to speak any Spanish, or like the if we spoke English, it was better, like less
Yeah.
attention, and I feel that it comes back to this, to blending in. The less attention you cause, the better, right? Like, and I feel that that magic really, the for many, many people, goes back to who you are, and what makes you you. But what makes me me is partly being a Venezuelan immigrant. Like, that's part of me that I cannot, just decide to forget about that. And that's part of my magic, right? And I feel that for so many of us, perhaps, even like, I've talked to some women about that work in finance and that work in and big like titles, right? And them saying that they do not dress with the colors they want to dress, being Latinas, and like I don't know, like hot pink or whatever it
We
is.
like color.
Yes, but because they're in that environment and
Yeah.
they don't feel, and this is something very, it can be seen as something very little, right? Like what color of clothes you want to wear, but it goes up to how do you want to wear your hair, right? Like what's the volume, or do you allow yourself to use when you're talking? Because for so many people, it's like, why are you screaming, or like, why are you moving your hands so much? It's like, it's I feel that it goes back to survival, and the more I blend in, the better it was, right, for me or for my family. um and because we've been living in survival mode for so many years, there's so much self-doubt, Minessa, in like, wait, like, what's gonna happen, right? Like, is this, what do I even like? And I feel
Mhm.
that that's a lot of what I do through my workshops. It's like really exploring that self-identity piece. What's yours? What's not yours? You've been told this and that, but is that something? What do you think, right? Because I feel that there's all this talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is great, but it seems to me that we don't really get to appreciate and get all the benefit from that until we truly know who we are, like who is
Absolutely.
it yeah. So I feel that we suppress all of that because we've been living on survival mode for so long, trying to blend in, trying to be okay, being quiet, right? And just being humble. being grateful, all these things. Does that make sense,
Oh my
Vanessa? What
God,
do you
it so
think?
does. And you know, the thing that actually, I think you've given me like the best segue ever. This is going to be such a great clip. So we're going to pull this as a freaking clip. Is that no, because you said, right, you're talking about blending in, and like you gave me a perfect segue to talk about why whiteness is a privilege, right? Because I'm Pakistani, but I look white, I pass. And that gives me the ultimate privilege of being able to completely blend in if I choose to, which means that I only need to claim my identity if I want to. I don't, and that's a privilege, right? And so, and in the context of what you just said, that makes sense as to why that's a privilege, right? Because a lot of times people will say, like, why is whiteness a privilege? Like, what does that do for me? Like, especially if you're not a person of color at all, like you're just white, right? And you're just like, dude, I don't understand. I grew up, I had to struggle, I had to do all those things. Like, why is whiteness, like, why does that be a privilege? Why can that be a privilege? And I think the key thing that you talked about is that everybody's trying to blend in, and the better and the easier of a journey you have to blend in, right, the more privilege you have because you're blending in. And so this is something that's like so important for people to recognize, right? Because now on the flip side of that conversation, okay, is this: I'm not Pakistani enough because I'm not dark enough.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
used to talk about, so I speak Urdu. I grew up speaking Urdu, but there's a lot. In fact, my first language was Urdu, right? So like I spoke English a lot of my life, but you know, my first word was Hathi, you know, so that means elephant. And my mom always thought that was funny that my first word was Hathi. When I was living in the United States, I was like, it was in like, you know, I was living in Texas for like that year right before we moved. And so I was in Pakistan, I was never Pakistani enough. I was always the white one, right? I was always and so there's like a huge lot for me. I always felt left out because I was like, well, I'm not, you know, enough for my culture, right? And then here, and so it's like it's really interesting, I think, as we talk about these ideas, just in general, the fact that we all have to think about these in and of themselves adds to it a layer of privilege to somebody who never has to think about these things, right? So like I never have to think about whether I'm like, because I, like, not me, but like I'm talking about somebody who literally never has to think about these things because I still think about them just in a different way. And I think that for me, I suppressed so much of myself in various ways because, again, trying to assimilate, because I came to the States in 1998, and 2001 was September 11th, right? So like almost immediately, I'm now a Pakistani in the States, and people are always making these terrorism jokes, and they're like, and there's a lot, it was like, why do you people hate our country? There's just, so like at that time, it was in my best interest to just blend in, right? Because that's where
Absolutely.
it is safer, because people, there was a lot of anti-Arab violence at the time, brown skin violence, that kind of thing. I mean, at the time, like that doesn't happen now,
I
but at the
know.
time it was very intense because of that particular issue. Right now, there's a whole different volume happening. And I would argue an intensified and accelerated thing that now people in the workplace have to think about, right? And so the question I think is like, you know, there's an element of, for some people, DEI is like an activity that they're doing, but I think for people of color, DEI is more about safety, right? About feeling safe in the workplace. What do you think about that?
I feel it depends on the context. What I've seen is that in theory, it could help them feel safe, but unfortunately, it could also be seen as a check mark, right? Like, oh, our company, we're doing this check, right? And you can tell when that's the case. And I feel looking at it from that perspective, it almost instead of helping you feel safe, I feel that it has the opposite effect because you feel it, you know it. So it's like, oh no, right? Like this is do you know what I mean, Vanessa? What do you think? Oh, you're muted.
Ah, Yes, no, yeah, no, I'm absolutely with you because I think that that's the difference, right, between the DEI initiatives that work and the ones that don't. Because, like, let's say
Yeah.
I'm approaching DEI from a space of, okay, I want to make sure that my employees feel safe in this place. Okay, so the first thing I have to do is make sure I have a person of color on HR. Just have to make sure that that happens, right? So, like,
And
now I've
hopefully in
done
every department, but
well,
yeah, like
let's divide,
let's
let's
start
just
with
start, right?
something.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm just using this as an example, right? And then, I mean,
Yeah.
wait a minute, we need people of color in every department. But
Everywhere. Yes.
my actual point though is that if anybody has any problems, they have to have someone to be able to take it to, right? So, like, I gotta have that, right? What other things do I need? You just said adding, making sure that there's people of color in departments,
Leadership positions,
leadership
because
positions.
what, right? Like, so um can you really show that it is possible for you to grow in that corporation as a person of color,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
because you're a person of color, but because you're great at what you do, and because you deserve the
You deserve it.
you deserve it. You deserve the opportunity of being seen. But when you don't see representation, it's it's harder, right?
Oh, I mean, you don't think that, like, because it sends a message, you're not the person we're looking for.
Yeah.
And so people of color in leadership, people of color in, and it has to be, when I think about, because, like, in some places that are smaller, right? You've got to, like, think to yourself, if I have 5 people, how many people are you going to have, like, and not thinking about it in terms of, oh my God, dude, I saw this thing the other day and I thought it was so, like, so somebody posted and said, don't put people of color on your staff because of, like, we're not spices. You don't just add us here and be like, okay, right? And so it really made me think about it a lot, right? And I realized, you know what? It's not about spices. And I said, you know what it is? It's about the fact that each person you have, forget about color for a moment. Let's just talk about each person with a different background, a different set of
Mm,
experiences that you bring into a conversation or a room will bring that much more brilliance, that much more problem solving ability, that much more depth, because you're getting a lot of different perspectives. When
absolutely.
we're thinking about DEI, we really need to not be thinking about it in terms of color, race, but different experiences, and saying, okay, well, the only person who could have had this type of different experiences is a Black man from Detroit, or is or like the Black community in Boston, or the Pakistani community here, or anyone could have this if they grew up in poverty or whatever. But, like, the experiences, and then at that point you're actually going to by default bring in people of a variety of races, religions, colors. Like, you'll have a spectrum because you're actually looking for the different experiences. But I think right now we're so fixated, and I mean life experiences, I don't mean work experiences, because if you're looking at work experiences, you're going to end up with the same list over and over again. I'm thinking, like, you came from Venezuela. Wow. Think, like, I know how much work you had to do to be able to get to be able to get the visas, and over the years, like, just how the system works, right?
Hmm.
And so that's an experience I don't have. Bringing you to the room by default makes it a better room.
Yeah. And also, I feel that right now, in many spaces I go, I feel this division. It's like us versus them, almost, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's either good or bad. It's like um I don't want to get into politics, but that, exacerbated all of this black and white thinking for so many people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, can we just, what happens when you listen to each other, right? And when you're it's just like, what can you learn? Like, what can I know this might sound so cliche, Minessa, but
I
it's
know,
like,
but it's, things
right?
become
Like
cliche for a reason.
it's like, okay, but like, what happens when you are able to listen somebody else talking about their life experience,
Yeah.
or listen somebody else talking about whatever it is, but with that level of tolerance and compassion, and um even if, like, it doesn't have to be anything huge, and many times that's where the magic is. But I guess what I want to bring is how that opens up space for you being more tolerant, you learning about
Mhm.
yourself, because you also learn about what is it that trigger you, or what is it that you don't like, you learning that we all have we're all biased, right?
Mhm.
And saying that I'm not, it's just not true. But yeah, it's like everything that can open up when once that space is a possibility. And in so many places right now, it's not even a possibility. Like it's not even something to consider. So
So let me ask you something actually. You talked about, I think probably the most important thing was like you said, I mean, you said a lot, like you've said so many important things. All this entire episode is just clips and clips. And I looked at the time just now and I'm like, oh my God, have we already been talking for 45 minutes? Like, how does that happen? I haven't even asked you a single question from my list. This is how great this, love it. But here I think let's wrap on this question is one of the most important things I think we all need to do, and this is the hardest thing I do, right, in my life, I think anytime I do it, is confront our own biases. So I'm
mm,
curious to know if we're all going to walk away from this, right, and say, okay, like, because we talked a lot today about DEI and how people feel, and I think like this is such a great opportunity for people to get to know like a different experience of the world and just sort of like, I mean, because I feel like these are the things we talk about when we're just talking, not on a podcast. So like you get to be a fly on the wall. But I think that walking away, being able to challenge your own biases is like probably the greatest gift you can walk away with because it'll make it easier to create empathy, to create relationships. So I'd love to hear from you if I came to you as a client, the client as a client or a patient, sorry, as a patient, um, and I'm basically I want to learn how to confront my own biases and deal with that awful discomfort that comes when you realize you have a bias. Like, how do we navigate that uncomfortable space? And like, how would you recommend somebody work through some of that?
yeah. So I would say, first of all, and I say this for so many things, but I don't get tired of saying it, you don't have to do it on your own, right? Like, I feel that so many of us, we're so good at convincing ourselves that we can do it on our own. We've been doing it. We have proof that we can do it on our own. We can get very good at it. I don't need any help. I can be hyper independent. And it's like, well, what if you ask for help to start out with? And Mines, I feel that self-compassion can be such a key ingredient to for everything, really. Like that self-compassion changed my life. That's a pillar on the work I do. I feel that as people of color is exceptionally hard to practice self-compassion, even though we might understand it in theory. But adding self-compassion to this process of um well, you can be nice to yourself learning about it and navigating through it, and nice to yourself by letting somebody hold you, right? And help you. You don't need to do it on your own. And like there's the elements of self-compassion that I don't want to talk about now, but when we really break self-compassion into what it means, each of those elements can be so helpful in the whole process. So,
You made me tear up there. I like that self-compassion. I think honestly, it was the single greatest skill that I learned
oh,
in my healing journey. It has helped me enormously, like throughout the years. Like I cannot stress enough that that is, if you take nothing away from this podcast, take that away. Self-compassion. All right. So to wrap up, you are located in Massachusetts. So let's say someone in Massachusetts is looking for a therapist. How do they find you? How do they work with you? Or someone wants to hire you for their company. How do they connect?
yeah. So I'm in Massachusetts. DulceOrozco.com. That's my website. I'm active through LinkedIn and Instagram, and it's Latina immigrant therapist all together. So I work one-on-one with mostly women of color in Massachusetts. And the good thing is that I can work with corporations or groups or colleges nationwide, because that is not therapy. What I do with in that setting is not therapy. So um, they can connect with me. We'll take it from there. We'll explore what they need. And I also started doing um, you know, those corporations that have retreats. So I
Yeah, yeah,
started
uh-huh.
working. Yeah. So I'm so
Amazing.
excited to explore all these different avenues. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's fab. All right, you know that I am a total proponent of therapy. So if you're in Massachusetts and you're looking for a therapist, don't say is your person, go. And then if you own a company or if your company needs this kind of support, or heck, if you just want to explore and learn a little more, make sure you reach out to her. Don't say thank you so much for your time today. It was so great talking to you.
Thank you, Minessa. Thank you. Thank you. I know that I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours.
I
So
know, right? We really could. Like it's I was like, oh my God, it's time to go. Okay, I'm gonna stop